Do you remember those clever cooking tricks your grandpa knew and we forgot? They once stretched meals, kept food fresh, and turned scraps into supper. What else have we quietly let slip from our kitchens? Saving bacon grease for frying was one of those simple yet clever tricks that made a small kitchen feel full of flavor. Your grandfather knew that nothing went to waste, and that included the drippings left after frying bacon. He would pour the grease carefully into an empty coffee tin or jar, set it aside, and use it later to season vegetables, cornbread, or fried potatoes. The result was food that tasted richer without needing extra butter or oil. Families got used to that smoky flavor, and many grew to prefer it over store-bought fats. It was not only about thrift, but also about taste, since the grease held on to every bit of smoky bacon essence. Back then, there was pride in stretching every part of an ingredient as far as it could go. Today, we mostly throw those drippings away, not realizing that one of the best old secrets to deep, hearty cooking was right there in the pan all along. Stretching meat with oats was a kitchen practice that meant the difference between one dinner and several. Ground beef was expensive, and there were times when even the smallest amount had to feed the whole family. Your grandfather knew that mixing rolled oats into the meat gave it more bulk, held it together, and made it go further. The oats also absorbed seasonings and juices, adding a nutty texture that made burgers, meatballs, and meatloaf taste heartier. It was an honest way to keep plates filled without spending more. This was not some hidden secret either, since many cookbooks and neighbors shared the idea during lean times. Oats were cheap, easy to store, and always available, so they became the natural choice. A single pound of beef could now serve twice as many people, and no one complained because the flavor was still there. Families grew up on this trick, never realizing how much it saved their parents each week. Canning tomatoes on the porch was as much a tradition as it was a necessity. When the summer gardens produced more than anyone could eat, your grandfather and grandmother would set up boiling pots outdoors to bottle the extras. It kept the kitchen cool and gave them room to work with cases of jars and baskets of fruit. The sound of lids popping tight meant food for the winter, long after the vines had withered. Fresh tomatoes were peeled, cooked down, and sealed away, ready to become soups, sauces, or stews months later. The porch became a workshop of bubbling water, steam rising in the heat, and neighbors lending a hand. It was not only about storage, but also about pride in keeping the harvest alive. Families relied on those jars when store shelves were bare or when money was thin. Today, canning has almost vanished, but back then it was the quiet heartbeat of survival and togetherness. Reviving stale bread with steam was one of those clever moves that saved money and waste. When a loaf turned hard and dry, most people today would throw it out. Your grandfather knew better. He wrapped the bread in a damp towel, placed it in a warm oven, and let the steam soften it back to life. In just a short while, what seemed like a brick could be sliced and eaten as if fresh from the bakery. It was not only practical, but also comforting to know that no food needed to be wasted. Families learned to stretch every loaf, and the trick became second nature in kitchens across America. A simple towel and a little patience turned leftovers into tomorrow's breakfast toast. Children never noticed that the bread had been on its last leg. It was one more way a clever hand in the kitchen turned hardship into something that felt almost magical. Making coffee with eggshells may sound strange now, but it was an old trick that made sense in its time. Your grandfather would save clean eggshells, crush them, and stir them into the pot of boiling coffee grounds. The shells drew out bitterness, settled the grounds, and left the coffee clearer and smoother. It was especially common when brewing coffee over campfires or on stovetops without filters. The calcium in the shells worked like a natural clarifier, making the drink easier on the stomach. Back then, coffee was precious and no one wanted to waste it or choke down a bitter cup. This trick gave every pot a mellow flavor that store-bought blends could not match. It was simple, cheap, and effective, the kind of trick passed down by word of mouth rather than written in a book. It showed that clever thinking could turn even the most ordinary morning into something quietly remarkable. Turning leftover ham bones into soup was more than just resourcefulness. It was tradition. After a big meal, when the ham was mostly gone, The bones still held enough flavor to stretch for days. Your grandfather would drop it into a pot with beans, peas, or lentils, letting it simmer slowly. The result was a broth that carried the rich taste of the ham into every bite. Vegetables and scraps were added, making the soup hearty and filling without needing fresh meat. Nothing went to waste, and a single holiday ham could feed a family long after the feast. These soups warmed homes in the winter and kept bellies satisfied when budgets were tight. They became a reminder that real cooking was about using what you had, not what you wished for. The smell of a ham bone simmering on the stove was a comfort all its own, proof that thrift could still taste like celebration. Using newspaper to ripen fruit was one of those small, clever fixes that worked without fancy gadgets. When tomatoes or bananas were still green, your grandfather would wrap them in newspaper and leave them in a warm corner of the house. The trapped gases and warmth helped them ripen faster and more evenly. It was cheap, practical, and surprisingly reliable. Back then, wasting fruit was unthinkable, so this method gave every harvest a second chance. Families used it to bring in tomatoes from the garden before the frost or to make store-bought bananas ready for baking. The newspaper trick turned waiting days into just a night or two, keeping meals on schedule without spending extra money. It was not something written in manuals, but passed down from experience and observation. Today we buy fruit ready-made, but once upon a time, ripening your own was part of daily life, and everyone knew how. Cooking potatoes in wood ashes was a trick straight from the campfire days. Your grandfather knew that you did not need pots or pans to make a good meal if you had patience and a fire. Potatoes were tossed into the hot ashes, covered and left to cook slowly. The skin would char, the insides would steam, and when peeled open, the flesh was soft, smoky, and rich. It was a food of farmers, hunters, and workers who needed nourishment on the go. Potatoes were cheap, filling, and easy to carry, so the ash method turned them into a meal anywhere. Families used this during picnics, camping trips, or even when cooking fuel was scarce at home. The flavor was unlike anything from an oven, earthy and comforting in its simplicity. It was a meal of resourcefulness, showing how little you really needed to eat well if you knew a few clever tricks. Preserving herbs in salt was a quiet tradition in many kitchens. Fresh herbs wilted quickly, and refrigeration was not always dependable. To keep them useful, your grandfather would layer sprigs of herbs in jars with coarse salt. The salt drew out moisture, kept them green, and captured their flavor for months. Later, when soups or stews needed seasoning, a pinch from the jar carried the taste of summer gardens into winter meals. It was a simple preservation method, but it worked reliably, and the salt itself became flavored too. This made cooking more vibrant even when fresh supplies were long gone. Families treasured these jars, sometimes treating them as small luxuries when times were lean. It was a reminder that with just salt and patience, even fragile greens could last through the hardest seasons. Today we buy dried herbs in bottles, forgetting that once every home had its own jars tucked away like a hidden pantry of flavor. Boiling cloth bags of pudding was one of those homely tricks that saved energy and made dessert possible. Instead of baking in the oven, your grandfather's family would fill a cloth bag with a sweet batter of flour, sugar, dried fruit, and spices, then tie it shut. The bag was dropped into simmering water and left to cook slowly. Hours later, the pudding was removed, firm and fragrant, sliced and served like cake. It required no oven fuel, no special pans, and only the most basic ingredients. Families cherished these puddings at holidays because they felt festive without needing luxuries. The cloth bag could be washed and reused, keeping the tradition going for years. Each slice was proof that desserts could be made from scraps and patience. It was not fancy, but it filled plates and brought smiles when sweetness was hard to come by. Clever, thrifty, and warming, it was dessert born from hardship that still felt like a treat. Keeping lettuce crisp with damp towels was one of those quiet tricks that every grandfather seemed to know without ever needing a manual. Refrigerators with crisper drawers were not common in every household, so a simple towel soaked lightly in water became the next best thing. lettuce heads would be wrapped gently and stored in a cool corner or ice box. The damp cloth slowed wilting, kept leaves from drying out, and added days of freshness to a vegetable that otherwise spoiled quickly. Families depended on greens for salads, sandwiches, and suppers, and wasting even one head of lettuce felt like throwing away money. The towel method stretched groceries further and kept meals looking more appetizing. A plate of limp, tired lettuce was never as welcome as one with crisp, bright leaves. This clever trick was taught in kitchens and passed quietly across generations, a testament to making do with little. Today, many people do not even think about it, but back then, a damp towel was the line between waste and dinner. Using vinegar to tenderize meat was a clever way to make cheaper cuts taste like something far more expensive. Grandfathers would marinate beef, pork, or chicken in vinegar, sometimes mixed with herbs and spices before cooking. The vinegar broke down tough fibers, softened the texture, and carried flavors deep into the meat. This trick turned flank steak or stew beef into a dish fit for Sunday supper without needing prime cuts. Vinegar was cheap, easy to store, and always available, which made it the perfect kitchen tool for families working on tight budgets. Even the smell of meat soaking in a vinegar marinade became tied to home cooking and frugality. Long before bottled tenderizers filled grocery shelves, this was the natural solution. It allowed every scrap of meat to be useful and delicious, keeping families fed when resources were scarce. Clever and practical, this simple trick showed how one pantry staple could transform a meal into something memorable. Cooking corn directly in husks was an old method that brought out flavors in ways modern kitchens often overlook. Grandfathers would toss whole ears of corn, husks and all, into hot coals or onto the edges of wood stoves. The husks protected the kernels while trapping steam inside, leaving the corn tender and naturally sweet. The slight charring added a smoky taste that felt indulgent even when it was just a simple farm staple. Butter was not always available, but steaming corn and husks gave it a richness all its own. Families often gathered outside around fires to share ears peeled back fresh from the embers. It was easy, filling, and satisfying, especially after a long day of work. The method required no pots, pans, or fancy seasonings, just patience and an open flame. Even today, few things compare to the rustic taste of corn roasted this way. It was proof that the simplest tricks made some of the most unforgettable meals. Making soup from scraps was a tradition built on necessity and thrift. Onion skins, carrot tops, celery leaves, and bones that others might throw away were collected and simmered into broths. Nothing was wasted, and every bit of flavor was coaxed from ingredients that seemed past their usefulness. Grandfathers knew that scraps still carried value, and a pot of soup could feed a family with hardly any fresh ingredients. The broth would simmer slowly, filling the house with comforting aromas that belied its humble beginnings. Vegetables, noodles, or grains were often added to turn the broth into a full meal. This practice meant fewer trips to the market and more meals from the same supply. It was not only practical but also a reminder of resourcefulness in hard times. Families ate well because someone knew how to turn scraps into sustenance. Soup from scraps may sound simple today, but it was once a mark of clever survival in the kitchen. Turning rendered fat into soap showed just how little was wasted in those earlier kitchens. After roasting or frying meat, the leftover fat was collected and stored until enough was gathered for soap making. Mixed with lye and water, it hardened into bars that cleaned as effectively as anything from a store. Grandfathers remembered a time when buying soap was a luxury, and this homemade version kept households supplied. The process was smelly and messy, but the end result was useful and reliable. Every bit of animal, from fat to bone, was valued for what it could provide. This trick tied together cooking and cleaning in a cycle of practicality. Even when money was tight, families could stay stocked with something essential. It was a reminder that nothing had to go to waste, not even grease. Soap made from kitchen fat was not glamorous, but it worked, and that was all that mattered. Homemade root beer in stone jugs was a tradition that blended fun, flavor, and ingenuity. Using sassafras roots, sugar water, and yeast, grandfathers would brew their own bubbly drinks at home. The mixture fermented just enough to create carbonation, making it fizzy and refreshing without being strong. Families often kept jugs tucked away in cool spots, waiting days until the drink was ready. It was a treat for children and adults alike, especially during warm summers when store-bought sodas were too costly or unavailable. Brewing root beer turned kitchens into little workshops of science and patience. The smell of sassafras filled the air, and the sound of corks popping was part of the excitement. It connected people to the land and to old traditions, since sassafras was foraged or traded. Sharing a glass was about more than taste, it was about celebrating something made with your own hands. It was one of those clever traditions that brought joy without spending much. Using cold cellars instead of refrigerators was a practice rooted in necessity. Grandfathers dug cellars into the earth or used existing basements to store food at a steady, cool temperature. Root vegetables like carrots, turnips, and potatoes were kept in bins of sand or sawdust to preserve them for months. Apples were stacked carefully, and cabbages hung from rafters to slow spoilage. The earth itself provided the refrigeration, keeping food edible long after harvest. This system meant families could rely on their crops through the winter without needing electricity. It also gave a sense of security, knowing that there was always something stored below ground. Visiting the cellar to gather ingredients was part of daily routine, a reminder of careful planning and foresight. Today, we take freezers for granted, but once it was a point of pride to keep a cellar stocked. Clever, reliable, and simple, it was one of the most effective survival tricks of the time. Baking with sorghum syrup was a trick that came from times when sugar was too costly or scarce. Sorghum, grown in fields across the South, was boiled down into a thick, sweet syrup. It was cheaper, plentiful, and stored well, making it the perfect stand-in for sugar in cakes, cookies, and breads. Grandfathers often recalled how the deep, earthy sweetness of sorghum gave baked goods a unique flavor that store-bought sugar never matched. Families grew to love the taste, and recipes were passed down through generations. Using sorghum also meant independence, since it could be produced locally rather than purchased. During lean years, it made baking possible when other sweeteners were out of reach. A drizzle of sorghum on biscuits or cornbread was a treat in itself. It was more than just a substitute. It was a reminder of how creativity and resourcefulness kept kitchens alive. Sorghum syrup was not just sweet, it was survival made delicious. Cooking fish on wooden planks was an old outdoor trick that gave ordinary meals extraordinary flavor. Grandfathers would place fillets on soaked planks of cedar or oak, then set them near fire or coals. The wood steamed and smoked, infusing the fish with a rich aroma while keeping it moist. This method required no fancy pans or seasonings, just wood and patience. The result was a meal that tasted both rustic and refined, perfect for family gatherings or camp suppers. It was also practical, since the fish did not stick to pans and cleanup was easy. The technique carried a sense of tradition, passed down from native practices and embraced by homesteaders. Sharing fish cooked this way was a memorable experience, blending nature, flavor, and simplicity. Even when money was scarce, this trick made a humble catch taste like a feast. It was proof that clever cooking did not depend on gadgets, but on timeless knowledge. Stretching milk with powdered milk was a clever kitchen fix that made supplies last longer without anyone noticing. When fresh milk was limited, grandfathers would mix it with reconstituted powdered milk to increase the volume. The flavor stayed close enough that children never knew the difference, and the household budget stretched further. Powdered milk was shelf-stable, cheap, and always on hand, making it the perfect backup when fresh deliveries were unreliable. This trick was especially useful for baking, cereals, or cooking, where small changes in taste went unnoticed. Families who relied on daily milk found comfort in knowing there was always enough. It became one of those silent household practices that kept everything running smoothly. Today, powdered milk is often overlooked, but back then it was a staple that quietly carried families through lean times. It was not glamorous, but it worked, and that was all that mattered. Clever, simple, and effective, it was a survival tool hidden in plain sight. Making gravy from pan drippings was one of those clever tricks that turned scraps into something that felt like a feast. Grandfathers did not need store-bought mixes or powders. They simply saved the grease left in the skillet after frying meat, stirred in a bit of flour, and added water or milk until it thickened. The drippings carried all the flavor from the meat, giving the gravy depth without costing a cent. This was poured over biscuits, potatoes, or vegetables to stretch small meals further. Even a plain dinner suddenly tasted hearty and comforting with gravy on top. It was an economical habit that also became a flavor tradition in many homes. The method required nothing more than patience and a steady hand at the stove. Families who grew up on meals like this remember it as the taste of home, rich and simple at the same time. Today, most people buy mixes, but the old method proved resourcefulness always tasted better. Crisping cracklings for cornbread was a favorite move in kitchens where nothing was wasted. When pork was rendered for fat, the crunchy bits left behind were saved as cracklings. Grandfathers stirred these into cornbread batter before baking, adding texture, flavor, and protein. The result was a golden pan of cornbread with crisp surprises in every bite. It was filling, nutritious, and kept families satisfied when meat was scarce. Crackling cornbread became more than food. It was a memory of gatherings around the table, where every slice carried the taste of thrift and ingenuity. This simple addition turned a humble bread into a complete meal. Served with beans or greens, it could keep a family full for hours. The practice showed how every part of an animal was valued, down to the last crunchy morsel. Today, the idea seems unusual, but back then, cracklings in cornbread were a sign of clever cooking and smart living. Packing ice boxes with sawdust may sound unusual today, but it was once a clever way to stretch the life of ice. Families without refrigerators relied on ice deliveries, and each block had to last as long as possible. Grandfathers knew that covering the ice with sawdust slowed melting and reduced waste. Sawdust acted as natural insulation, keeping the ice solid through hot summer days. Children remembered digging into piles of sawdust at ice houses where blocks were stored before delivery. The method was messy but effective, and everyone accepted it as part of daily life. An ice box lined with sawdust meant milk stayed cooler, butter did not spoil as quickly, and leftovers could be saved a little longer. It was a small adjustment that made a big difference for households trying to stretch every dollar. Sawdust was cheap, available from lumber yards, and worked better than most alternatives. It showed how practicality often outshone modern convenience in its own quiet way. Preserving eggs in water glass was a trick that kept kitchens running smoothly long before modern refrigeration became part of everyday life. Water glass, also known as sodium silicate solution, was mixed with water in crocks or jars to create the preserving liquid. Freshly laid eggs were carefully placed into the mixture, where the solution sealed their porous shells and kept bacteria out. This prevented spoilage and kept the eggs tasting remarkably close to fresh. Grandfathers and grandmothers relied on this trick to store dozens of eggs through the cold winter months when hens naturally laid fewer. Families could count on having protein for baking, frying, or scrambling even when nothing new came from the coop. The eggs stayed edible for months, sometimes close to a full year, which gave households security in times of shortage. The crocks were usually kept in cool root cellars, safe from heat and sunlight, and were checked occasionally to ensure none were cracked. It was a practice that required planning and patience, but the reward was a dependable food supply without relying on markets. Today, the method is nearly forgotten, yet it remains one of the most clever and practical survival skills of the past. Cooking beans overnight on the stove was a practice that blended patience, thrift, and practicality in the best possible way. Dried beans were inexpensive, plentiful, and stored well, but they were tough and required long hours of cooking to become tender. To save effort, grandfathers would set heavy pots of beans on the back of the wood stove before going to bed, leaving them to simmer slowly all night. By morning, the beans had softened perfectly, absorbed seasonings, and were ready to feed the entire family without further fuss. This slow simmering method let the beans soak up flavors from onions, garlic, herbs, or even scraps of leftover ham bone tossed into the pot. The smell filled the kitchen by dawn, a comforting reminder that food was waiting for anyone who rose early to begin the day. Beans cooked this way stretched small budgets further, providing protein and nutrition at very low cost. They were served with bread, rice, or potatoes, and the leftovers were reheated for days. It was not glamorous food, but it was hearty and dependable, a true staple in households across America. This clever trick proved patience was often the most powerful kitchen tool. Making vinegar from apple scraps was an old and clever trick that turned what others considered waste into something valuable and lasting. After peeling or coring apples for pies, preserves, or snacks, grandfathers and grandmothers would gather the scraps into jars or crocks, cover them with water and sugar, and leave them to ferment naturally. Over time, wild yeasts transformed the mixture into tangy homemade cider vinegar. It required no special tools, only patience and an understanding that nature would do most of the work. Families stored these crocks in pantries or cellars where they aged until ready to use. The vinegar was versatile. It added flavor to sauces and marinades, tenderized tougher cuts of meat, preserved vegetables through pickling, and even served as a cleaner around the house. In lean years, making vinegar at home saved valuable money since store-bought versions were unnecessary. It also offered a sense of independence, knowing every part of the apple had a purpose and nothing went to waste. This practice was more than just thrifty, it was a proud example of resourcefulness and creativity. Homemade vinegar stood as proof that clever living turned scraps into sustenance and tradition. Smoking meat in the backyard shed was one of those timeless practices that kept food safe without refrigeration. Grandfathers built simple smokehouses from wood or stone, using controlled fires to cure meat slowly. The smoke not only preserved the meat, but also gave it a flavor unmatched by fresh cuts. Hams, sausages, and fish hung for days or weeks, soaking in the smoke until they were ready. Families relied on these sheds to store protein for months, making sure nothing spoiled when cold weather set in and hunting or farming slowed. The process took steady effort, since fires had to be tended carefully to give enough smoke without burning the meat. Neighbors often gathered at these sheds, trading advice, swapping wood types, and even sharing a portion of their catch. The smell of hickory or oak smoke drifting from the shed became part of the rhythm of rural life, something as natural as the changing seasons. It symbolized self-reliance and pride in providing for one's family with skill instead of store-bought conveniences. Today, smokehouses are rare and mostly seen as hobbies, but the tradition still stands as a clever example of survival and community bound together by food. Using starch water for ironing was a thrifty household trick that showed nothing went to waste. After boiling potatoes or rice, the leftover water was saved instead of poured away. Grandfathers and grandmothers alike knew that this starchy liquid could be brushed, sprinkled, or sprayed onto clothes before ironing. It stiffened fabric, smoothed wrinkles, and gave shirts or linens a crisp finish that looked sharp without spending extra money. This was long before spray starch bottles lined grocery shelves, and it worked just as well. The trick was simple, effective, and completely free, making it part of weekly routines in households across America. Families appreciated the polish it brought, especially when appearances mattered at school, in church, or at the workplace. It was one of those quiet lessons in resourcefulness, showing children that clever thinking stretched what little a household had. A pot of boiled rice might feed the family, and its water could keep clothes presentable too. Clever tricks like this proved that nothing in the kitchen was ever truly wasted, and that every byproduct had another purpose. Cooking dandelion greens for salad was a clever way of turning weeds into supper. Grandfathers knew that the bitter leaves, gathered from yards, fields, or roadsides, were packed with vitamins and minerals that families needed but often could not afford. They were washed carefully, sometimes boiled or blanched to soften the bite, and then dressed simply with vinegar, drippings, or a bit of lard. During spring, when gardens were bare and money was tight, these greens became a vital source of fresh food that cost nothing but a little effort to collect. Families gathered together to pick them, often turning the task into a small ritual of togetherness, teaching younger children how to identify the leaves. The taste was earthy and strong, but it was filling and nutritious, giving strength during lean weeks. Served alone or alongside beans, bread, or cornbread, dandelion greens added variety to otherwise plain meals. Today they are seen as gourmet items in restaurants, but once they were food of necessity. This clever foraging trick kept households alive when there seemed to be little else, a quiet reminder that resilience often grew right outside the doorstep. Layering newspaper in the icebox was another way grandfathers made cooling more effective before plastics and modern insulation. Sheets of newspaper were placed around blocks of ice, slowing the rate of melting and keeping temperatures steadier inside the box. The paper also absorbed drips as the ice thawed, making cleanup easier for the household. This trick stretched the usefulness of every delivery of ice, which was vital when budgets were thin and deliveries were not always dependable. Milk, butter, vegetables, and leftovers stayed fresh longer because of something as simple as yesterday's newsprint. Families learned to line shelves, cover containers, and wrap items with newspaper, adding an extra layer of insulation and protection. It was a clever, no-cost solution that every household practiced without thinking twice because it simply worked. Children often remembered digging through the icebox, noticing the soft crinkle of paper under dishes, a sound tied to memory as much as smell or taste. Though the method faded with the arrival of modern refrigerators, it symbolized the ingenuity of an era. Newspaper kept the cold in and the waste out, proving even scraps had hidden value worth remembering. By the mid-20th century, desserts had begun embracing an unlikely star: whipped toppings. The faithful fluff salad was no exception. A mixture of pineapple chunks, instant pudding mix, mini marshmallows, and whipped topping. This dessert was as much a texture experiment as it was a sugary indulgence. Emerging during the 1950s and 60s, fluff salads rode the wave of post-war prosperity. Processed foods like instant pudding and canned fruit were symbols of modernity and time-saving innovation, making them ideal for busy families and church potlucks. Adding marshmallows, initially a campfire treats, brought a playful twist that appealed to children and adults alike. For many, it was a dish that straddled the line between fun and functional. But as the health-conscious trends of the 1980s took hold, this sugar-loaded dessert began to lose its charm. Critics pointed to its processed ingredients and lack of nutritional value, relegating it to fond memories of a more carefree era. Despite its decline, the faithful fluff salad remains a snapshot of its time, a reminder of when culinary creativity meant combining unlikely ingredients to bring a smile to the faces of churchgoers and potluck attendees alike. In the heyday of church potlucks and picnics, desserts often carried the weight of a gathering's final impression, and glory-glazed fruit bars rarely disappointed. These sweet bars featured a buttery shortbread crust, a glossy layer of apricot jam, and a golden toasted coconut topping. Originating in the mid-20th century, when simple ingredients were elevated through ingenuity, these bars quickly became a favorite for their perfect balance of texture and flavor. The practicality of this dessert was undeniable. It was easy to prepare, made from pantry staples, and could be cut into neat squares for serving, ideal for feeding a crowd. The recipe was also versatile. Not a fan of apricot? Swap in strawberry, peach, or any other jam you had on hand. The coconut topping, lightly sweetened and crisped in the oven, added a unique flair that made these bars stand out in a sea of cookies and cakes. So why don't we see these delightful treats much anymore? Changing dessert trends and the rise of prepackaged sweets overshadowed the charm of homemade fruit bars. Additionally, coconut, once a common pantry item, has fallen out of favor with some due to dietary preferences or taste. Italian hot dishes, on the other hand, are a Minnesota classic. You couldn't go a day in the streets of the upper Midwest without being dazzled by all the different kinds of fragrances. By strong, alluring scents, I really just mean everyone's and their grandma's different takes on a hot dish. It was a tradition that came during the rise of casseroles in the 1950s, and it was something that became a pantry staple at one point. Casseroles were sort of the thing to eat back then because you could just get everything done with them. They became one of the most popular meals to make for home chefs because there wasn't a dinner where somebody would pout and go like, "Aw, casserole?" Even if it wasn't a lot each and every time, people still got visibly excited seeing Mom pop out of the kitchen with some casserole. Italian hot dishes especially were something to celebrate because it meant she was really going all out for the occasion. Despite this dish not really having much Italian history, it caught the name because it uses a lot of Italian. The rich, spicy aroma of a well-seasoned casserole was often the highlight of church potlucks, and Jubilee jambalaya casserole was no exception. This baked version of the Louisiana classic brought together rice, sausage, shrimp, and a bold Creole spice blend. It was hearty, flavorful, and had just the right amount of kick to leave everyone asking for the recipe. Jambalaya, with its roots in Spanish, French, and African culinary traditions, became a staple in Southern cooking centuries ago. Its adaptability made it a natural fit for church gatherings in the 1970s. Stretching expensive ingredients like shrimp with affordable staples like rice was economical, and baking it in a casserole dish made it easy to transport and serve to a crowd. Sausage added depth, and the Creole seasoning brought a vibrancy that elevated the dish beyond your average casserole. So why don't we see it much anymore? As jambalaya purists reclaimed the stovetop tradition, the baked casserole version began to lose its charm. Add in the rise of quicker meal solutions, and the labor-intensive nature of the dish didn't fit modern schedules. Layered pea salad might not have gotten the attention it deserved, but once you tasted it, you understood its appeal. This salad is all about layering, from the crispness of the peas to the creamy dressing, the crunchy bacon, and the sweetness of the onions. Every bite offers a perfect balance of flavors and textures. It's the kind of dish that brings everyone back for seconds, especially when the layers are built just right. The peas provide a subtle sweetness and pop, while the mayo-based dressing binds everything together in a way that makes the salad feel indulgent, despite its simplicity. It's a salad that works well for any occasion, but especially for those summer church picnics when you need a dish that can stand up to the heat and still taste great. And speaking of cool, refreshing salads, there's one more dish on the way that brings all the sweet and savory flavors into a gorgeous combination. Stay tuned for the next recipe. Molded Jell-O with fruit and nuts was a visually striking and festive dish that often served as a centerpiece at 1950s church potlucks. These gelatin molds incorporated chunks of canned or fresh fruit, such as pineapple, cherries, or oranges, and sometimes nuts like walnuts or pecans, suspended throughout brightly colored Jell-O. The molds were typically made in decorative shapes using special ring or bundt pans, making them as attractive as they were tasty. Served chilled, these Jell-O dishes offered a sweet, slightly tangy contrast to more savory items on the table. They required no baking and could be prepared well in advance, lending convenience to hosts. Molded Jell-O was a symbol of mid-century culinary innovation, showcasing how simple ingredients could be transformed into elegant and festive offerings. The texture and flavor combinations made these desserts a nostalgic reminder of the era's social gatherings, where presentation was just as important as taste. In the days of church picnics, where hearty casseroles and fried chicken often took center stage, divine dill cucumber salad offered a light, refreshing contrast. This dish, made with thinly sliced cucumbers coated in a tangy blend of vinegar, sour cream, and fresh dill, was a staple in the mid-20th century. It reflected a shift toward incorporating fresh produce into meals, particularly during the warmer months when cucumbers were plentiful in backyard gardens. Practicality was one of its strongest virtues. The ingredients were inexpensive and easy to find, and the dish required no cooking, making it a breeze to prepare for a crowd. It also held up well in the heat, a critical feature for outdoor gatherings. Its versatility meant it could be served as a side dish, a palate cleanser, or even as part of a sandwich filling. Despite its appeal, this crisp and creamy salad eventually fell out of favor. As more elaborate salads and pre-packaged options gained popularity, simpler recipes like this one began to feel outdated. Additionally, the growing focus on global cuisine brought bolder flavors to the forefront, leaving dill cucumber salad in the shadows. Sauerkraut is one of the most famous examples of Germans and Americans finding a perfect middle ground. It's one of those marriages of culture, flavors, and taste palettes that just manages to work for almost everyone. Back in the day, it was one of the biggest must-haves at potlucks, and regions with a strong European presence or active German communities couldn't get enough of it. Sauerkraut was known for two things. It was a roller coaster of different kinds of meats, cheeses, and potatoes. Two, it was filling, more than anything you could put in front of it for comparison. Two people on their own just weren't ever able to complete this casserole on their own. Lots of people think that it became such a crowd pleaser because of its roots as a dish made in rural areas. It was pretty much built to survive harsh winters. There's also the way it's really affordable. It takes basic things and simple crops to make one really good casserole that you can pretty much make whenever you would like. You can prepare the dish and put it in the fridge. You could transport that to wherever you're going, take it along with you and bake it there. You could also just bake it later, whenever you feel comfortable enough to. For lots of utility reasons, as well as a flavor profile you wouldn't find anywhere else, this German dish really made a name for itself here. Hot chicken salad casserole is everything you want in a comfort food. It's got shredded chicken, creamy mayo, crunchy celery, and potato chips on top for that satisfying crunch that you can't get enough of. This casserole might have started as a church recipe, but it's made its way into countless family kitchens across the country, becoming a staple for any gathering. The creaminess from the mayo blends perfectly with the crunchy texture of the potato chips, making every bite feel like a cozy hug. This dish can be thrown together quickly, baked until golden, and served hot, perfect for busy nights when you need something simple yet satisfying. Whether it's a quick weeknight meal or a potluck favorite, hot chicken salad casserole always gets rave reviews. And if you think this is a crowd pleaser, there's another dish on the horizon that's a little surprising but just as tasty. Creamed tuna on toast points was a rich, savory appetizer that was a common sight at church socials during the 1950s. This dish consisted of canned tuna mixed with mayonnaise, chopped celery, onions, and seasoning to create a creamy spread. The mixture was then piled generously on small triangles of toasted bread, often cut from white sandwich loaves. The toast points offered a crisp base that contrasted with the smooth, flavorful tuna salad topping. Creamed tuna on toast was easy to prepare in large quantities, making it ideal for feeding groups at potlucks. The dish was both affordable and filling, relying on pantry staples that were readily available to most households. Its popularity stemmed from the combination of convenience and elegance, turning simple ingredients into an appealing finger food. It also reflected the era's love for seafood dishes adapted to social occasions. Many remember this appetizer as a classic element of mid-century entertaining that brought people together around the food table. In the mid-20th century, before charcuterie boards became the height of culinary fashion, there was the humble yet beloved righteous relish tray. A staple at church picnics and potlucks, this platter featured an assortment of pickles, olives, and pickled vegetables, often accompanied by crackers or crusty bread. Simple yet striking, it was the perfect blend of salty, tangy, and crunchy, an ideal prelude to heartier fare. The historical roots of the relish tray can be traced back to a time when home canning was common, and pickled vegetables were a way to preserve the harvest. Offering an array of pickles at a gathering was not only practical, but also a point of pride for the home cooks who had prepared them. The versatility of the tray was another advantage. It could include anything from classic dill pickles and sweet gherkins to pickled carrots, onions, or even spicy peppers, making it easy to tailor to personal tastes or seasonal availability. So why has the relish tray largely vanished from modern tables? The rise of convenience foods played a big role. Store-bought appetizers and snack mixes replaced the need for handcrafted platters. Dauphinoise potatoes are another French classic that made the cut for lots of potlucks for an entirely different reason than the last two. On one hand, you had all kinds of dishes that were excelling in the convenience factor, and that's why they were getting so popular. On the other, you had dishes like this, which solely earned their place thanks to their quality. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing about a pinwheel sandwich that doesn't scream quality, especially if you get the hang of making them, but nothing about it really screams comfort either. That's not the case with Dauphinoise potatoes. These were everything you would want in your comfort food: creamy, cheesy, soft, easy to pair with other kinds of sides and main courses, and best eaten warm and hot. That made them not only a potluck favorite but also a holiday mainstay, and something people generally ate a lot of in the winters. It was also helpful that you could make this meal entirely in advance, and thanks to the advent of microwaves later, it was even easier to microwave it. There was also the growing culture of veganism that was spreading throughout the nation, and the vegan-free variant of this dish meant that it really just had something to offer to everyone. In the era of resourceful cooking, few desserts embodied practicality quite like a fruit cobbler made with canned fruit cocktail and a biscuit crust. Fellowship fruit cobbler was a mainstay at church potlucks, offering a sweet, bubbling dessert that could feed a crowd with minimal effort. The dish gained traction in the mid-20th century, when canned fruit cocktail became a pantry staple in American homes. A product of clever marketing and food preservation innovation, fruit cocktail offered a colorful mix of diced fruits that made desserts feel festive. Topping it with a simple biscuit crust not only stretched the dish but gave it that golden, flaky finish that felt homemade even when shortcuts were taken. As versatile as it was, the cobbler started losing its shine by the late 20th century. Fresh fruits became more accessible year-round, and modern palates leaned toward desserts with more nuanced flavors and textures. Canned fruit cocktail, once a novelty, began to feel dated. But for those who grew up with it, this cobbler remains a comforting reminder of shared meals, church fellowship halls, and a time when food was about bringing people together, not about impressing them with gourmet flair. Cornbread pudding, the perfect hybrid of savory and sweet, takes cornbread to a whole new level. This casserole-style dish features a custardy texture, with the comforting cornbread flavor acting as a base. Whether you're serving it as a side dish or a dessert, it's versatile enough to fit in any meal. Some versions are made with a rich, buttery sauce that soaks into the cornbread, adding depth to the flavor. Others might include a touch of sweetness, thanks to ingredients like brown sugar or maple syrup, creating a delightful balance of flavors. It's the kind of dish that's perfect for big gatherings, offering a taste of home and nostalgia with each bite. And just when you think this is the perfect combination of textures, there's a dish waiting to take comfort food to the next level. Stay tuned for the next unforgettable recipe. Cabbage and noodle salad was a favorite at many 1950s church potlucks, offering a light yet satisfying option among the heavier dishes. This salad combined tender-cooked noodles with finely shredded cabbage, tossed together in a simple dressing usually made from vinegar, oil, and sugar to balance tanginess and sweetness. Sometimes carrots or onions were added to enhance texture and color. The salad's crisp cabbage contrasted nicely with the softness of the noodles, creating a refreshing dish that complemented meat-heavy entrees. It was economical to prepare, feeding large groups with minimal ingredients, which made it especially popular during times when budgets were tight. Often served cold, cabbage and noodle salad could be made ahead and easily transported to potluck events. Its simplicity and wholesome flavor made it a comforting reminder of home cooking, cherished by many families across various regions. This dish embodied the communal spirit of church gatherings, where sharing food was about more than just eating. It was about connection. Many remember this salad fondly as a staple that brought both familiarity and lightness to the potluck table. In an era when practicality reigned supreme, shepherd's picnic pie became a go-to dish for outdoor gatherings. Inspired by traditional meat pies with roots in British cuisine, this portable hand pie featured a savory filling of seasoned ground beef, onions, and potatoes, all tucked into a golden, flaky crust. Perfectly sized for individual portions, these pies were as functional as they were flavorful, designed to be eaten without the need for plates or utensils. The appeal of these pies went beyond convenience. They were a testament to the resourcefulness of home cooks who found ways to stretch simple ingredients into a satisfying meal. The filling could be easily customized. Add peas or carrots for extra vegetables, or swap ground beef for whatever meat was on hand. The crust, often made with pantry staples like flour and lard, added a rich, buttery element that tied everything together. So what caused these hearty hand pies to disappear from picnic tables? The rise of fast food and pre-packaged snacks overshadowed time-intensive homemade recipes. As society moved toward grab-and-go convenience, The labor of rolling dough and assembling pies became less appealing. Frog eye salad, on the other hand, is something that came right out of the middle half of the 20th century. Now, I'm not too sure where people really got this one from. I mean, you'd think it came right from some community shacked up outside a swamp. Strangely enough, no frogs were harmed in the making of this plate of food. Instead, there's this specific kind of pasta they use. It's called acini di pepe, and it's this really small, almost bubbly-looking pasta that apparently has a pretty striking similarity to frog eyes once you cook it and bring all of it together. Now, a typical frog eye salad takes this pasta, puts in some whipped cream, pineapples, oranges, and coconut, and then it's chilled. You kind of want to picture something similar to tapioca or the texture of boba. It's a pretty unique dish, and if you start going through some cookbooks that had their peak sales during the 1950s, you'll definitely find this. For two reasons. One, it was just one of the most perfect salads to go with your potluck. Two, potluck culture as a whole was really on the rise. Steamed puddings might sound old-fashioned today, but in the 1970s, dishes like faithful fig pudding carried the weight of centuries-old traditions. Made with dried figs, molasses, and a blend of warming spices, this dessert was a nod to the rich culinary heritage of European settlers. It was dense, aromatic, and perfect for church gatherings, where a hearty dessert could double as a centerpiece. Historically, steamed puddings were practical creations. Long before ovens became common household appliances, steaming was a reliable way to prepare desserts, particularly during the winter months when ovens were occupied with other dishes. Dried figs and molasses were staples in American pantries, thanks to their long shelf life and affordability. Combined with spices like cinnamon and nutmeg, they created a dessert that was rich in flavor and relatively inexpensive to prepare. Despite its deep roots, fig pudding began to fade as tastes shifted toward lighter, quicker-to-make desserts. The lengthy steaming process required patience, a virtue many modern cooks didn't have time for. Heavenly hash, a chilled dish that captured the essence of nostalgia, was a favorite at church functions, especially in the summertime. This simple yet delightful mix of fruit cocktail, mini marshmallows, coconut, and sour cream was a creamy, sweet treat that brought everyone back to the good old days. It was the perfect dessert to bring to a church potluck, offering a refreshing and light dish that could be enjoyed on a warm afternoon. Despite its simplicity, Heavenly Hash had a way of surprising people with its comforting combination of flavors and textures. The fruit cocktail added a juicy sweetness, while the marshmallows provided just the right amount of softness. The coconut brought a subtle chewiness, and the sour cream tied it all together, adding a tangy balance. This dish was the kind of recipe that, once tasted, was never forgotten. But if you're looking for another unexpected twist on comfort food, there's a sweet savory casserole up next that will surely make you rethink pineapple in a whole new way. Jellied chicken salad was a quintessential 1950s dish that combined cooked chicken with vegetables set in a savory gelatin mold, reflecting the era's fascination with molded salads. This dish often included diced chicken, celery, onions, and sometimes nuts or chopped pimentos, suspended in a flavorful gelatin base made from chicken broth and unflavored gelatin. Served cold and sliced, it was both a visual centerpiece and a tasty salad that showcased creativity in presentation. Jellied chicken salad was often made in advance, allowing flavors to meld and the gelatin to set firmly, making it practical for potlucks and large gatherings. Though it might seem unusual today, at the time it represented a sophisticated and modern way to serve cold salads. The dish balanced texture and flavor with a slightly savory taste and a firm yet tender mouthfeel. Its popularity was tied to the post-war era's emphasis on convenience, novelty, and communal sharing, making it a memorable part of many church potluck tables. In the golden era of church picnics and potluck dinners, warm breadsticks were often a highlight of the meal, and none were more beloved than Hallelujah honey butter breadsticks. These soft, golden sticks of bread were brushed with a generous layer of honey butter and finished with a dusting of cinnamon. Sweet, buttery, and lightly spiced, they were the perfect combination of dessert and side dish, a treat that appealed to kids and adults alike. The practicality of these breadsticks made them a picnic favorite. They could be made ahead of time, reheated quickly, and served in large batches, ensuring there was enough for the crowd. Their versatility also added to their charm. They could be paired with coffee for an after-meal treat, served alongside savory dishes, or enjoyed all on their own. And let's not forget their portability, a major plus for outdoor gatherings. So why have these heavenly breadsticks become a rarity? As baking shortcuts like store-bought rolls gained popularity, labor-intensive homemade breadsticks fell out of favor. Health-conscious trends didn't help either, as buttery, carb-heavy recipes were pushed aside for lighter alternatives. Black bean sliders aren't really too in line with the spirit of everything else we've been making so far here, but they were a part of that trend of veganism I just talked about. These sliders were made with black beans, which I'm sure you know by now is something that Americans took to on a national scale right after their use during the Depression, especially in the South. It was in the South where black bean-based dishes went a step further beyond too, thanks to things like the black bean burgers. From there, sliders were the only natural progression, and that they were also coincidentally right in time for the dawn of vegetarian eating only helped propel them to the front lines of American eating. Despite what you might think, this actually still makes for a wonderful burger and a slider, and it's a good thing to break into a potluck for two reasons. One, it's something that everyone can enjoy, since even meat eaters have always warmed up to black beans. Two, it's something you can try out and eat while still leaving some room for the main dish later on. And that really helps it shine in group settings. In the days when nothing went to waste, a pot of slow-cooked beans with hog jowls and onions was a way of life. Rooted in Southern cooking traditions, this hearty meal was a staple at church potlucks and community gatherings. Pinto beans, rich in protein and fiber, were an affordable way to feed a crowd, while hog jowls, a cut from the cheek of the pig, added smoky, savory depth that transformed the humble legume into something extraordinary. Historically, this dish thrived in communities where resourcefulness was key. Hog jowls, often considered a byproduct, were a favorite in Southern cuisine, where the whole hog philosophy reigned supreme. Combined with onions and slow cooking, the result was a dish that was simple yet deeply flavorful. And let's not forget the practicality. Beans are inexpensive, shelf-stable, and could simmer all day while the cook tackled other tasks. But as modern tastes shifted, hog jowls fell out of favor. Health trends, coupled with the rise of leaner meats, left this dish behind in the dust of culinary history. Convenience foods like canned beans and pre-seasoned mixes didn't help either. Cheese and olive relish trays were a simple yet effective way to encourage conversation and sharing at church potlucks. These trays typically featured a selection of cubed or sliced cheeses alongside an assortment of olives, pickles, and sometimes pepperoncini peppers. Arranged attractively on a platter, this combination invited guests to nibble and mingle as they sampled different flavor pairings. The salty, briny taste of olives complemented the creamy, mild cheese varieties, offering a balance of textures and tastes that were appealing and easy to eat with fingers or small forks. These relish trays required little preparation, but made a big impact by adding variety to the potluck spread. They were particularly popular because they did not need heating and could be prepared well in advance, making them convenient for busy hosts. The trays also reflected the growing interest in appetizer-style foods during the mid-20th century, as Americans explored new ways to entertain and socialize around food. Swiss steak is definitely something that was mostly a traditional 20th century concept, though. It was pretty common for the working class almost everywhere to rely on potlucks. Who could blame them? You find something that ticks most boxes, or in some cases, all of them. You keep it close. Everyone does that. Don't you have your comfort fast food places you swear by and always go to when you need an order you can rely on? Swiss steak was pretty much just like that, and it was the first time that people got to know about Swissing meat. That's, by the way, where it gets the name from, not any cultural ties to Switzerland. Lots of people were relying on tough cuts of meat that weren't really the same kind of quality, but they were a lot more affordable. People figured that some pork is better than no pork, and again, could you fault them? Still, These kinds of recipes needed a lot of work to really make them shine and not just be a slogfest you have to chew your way through. Swissing the meat and slow cooking it potluck style made sure that it would be soft and tender, and in the end, you'd get a pretty wonderful saucy stew. Got a clever kitchen trick of your own? Drop it in the comments, smash that like button, and hit subscribe so we can keep swapping Grandpa's secrets together.